Welcome to another Allar tutorial. In this tutorial, I've decided that I'm going to go over on how to create a little bit more of an advanced HUD, different than what we've been doing. And while it's pretty standard to have a health icon on the left with some text and a ammo icon on the right with some text, I was thinking, what if you wanted to do some sort of type of bar for health instead? I know a lot of people are asking me about more advanced HUD stuff and different ways you can implement drawings and things. So I've kind of made this is very bad looking, but good for implementation purposes. This little HUD sprite that I made, and it's going. This little HUD status that I've made is going to feature some few things, and in order to implement it, it has to draw in the right order, and it has to draw certain textures based on percentages of values and things like that. And I figured this is a good way to get one to start thinking about if they need to create a more advanced type of dynamic HUD for their in-game HUD, then this would be a way to basically get them familiarized with the thought processes of how to make such an effect. Alright, so I'm about to open up my Photoshop file, and you're about to witness the worst texture ever. Now this implementation can work on any type of HUD texture, and or in particular any type of bar type of texture. But that's why I always recommend, if you're following my tutorials for art, you probably should get an artist. But I'm not going to go over how I created the art asset itself, just how I'm going to lay it out in my texture sheet, because that's pretty important. And your artist will need to understand this, and you will need to understand this when you implement it. However, the actual art making, that not so much. That's more of an art thing. Anyways, so here's my texture. I know, right? It's pretty ugly, right? But well, there are a few things that are going to look a little bit better than this in game, like this purple rectangle-ish thing. It's actually alpha, and it's going to transition off into nothing. But what we have here, very bad looking, I know, but it shows you some of the things you have to think of if you're creating a HUD. Now, this little circle here, in this circle, I'm going to be drawing some text on top of that, and that's going to be a score multiplier, because for the HUD, we're going to have things like score multipliers and actual scores for our game. And you might want that, you might not, but I'm just going to go into how to build that in case you do. If you don't, you can go ahead and skip that part. And then this purple box here is going to house some of our numbers, or draw some text, and that's going to represent the score of the current player. So it's going to draw it in there. It's not drawn on link nothing, but this purple is actually going to be gradiented off by the alpha, so it will fade into the world. That way you kind of get a nicer looking effect. It's not going to be this ugly purple. Now, we have three bars here also that's going on. This red bar, this green bar, and this blue bar. Now this is where some of the more advanced stuff comes in. Say if you wanted to build just a health bar, you could make a red rectangle in your script, or a red rectangle, and that'd be the flattest looking red rectangle. It'll look even worse than this, right? But if you want to create a texture that would somehow grow or shrink over time, or to transition based on a health percentage, then you would have to do something like this. And so what this health bar is going to do is it's going to see if you have no health, it's going to be completely empty. But if you have 100 health, or the max health based on your percentage on however you want to implement your health system, the bar will fill up along the way, and it's not going to do this cool little curve turn. It's just going to basically, if you have 50% health, it's going to be filled up to here. Or if you have 57% health, it's going to be filled up to there. And that's how it's going to work. Or if you have 100 health, it'll be filled up over here. So, but that's another thing that we'll go over soon. And figure all that, that's part of this tutorial. We're going to figure out how to implement a system like that. And the same thing is going to go for these the green and blue bars. Now for the hunt, we have charge bars for our guns because some of our guns you can charge up and then fire. So this blue bar is when we want them charge bars. And the screen bar, I'm not really sure what that's for yet, but for the sake of this tutorial, I added the third bar in there just so that you would know how to implement that as well. And this little green thing, I want to be putting some text on it or something. I'm not sure what I'm going to put on it yet, really, but it looked a little bit blank without it, so I figured I can put some fancy text there or something. And this blue bar kind of caps it in here, so you kind of know when these bars end. And this yellow bar, in the future, I would like for it to pull out with some sort of like panel coming from it, and it would show things like the current objective or a new thing you unlocked. But we're not going that far in this tutorial. I don't think we'll ever be doing that far, at least in the first series I'll be making. But with this here, you should be able to figure out how to do something like a pull-outable panel over time. And it all boils down to logic, really. Alright, so how are we going to accomplish this? Well, we can't just use this as our texture because there's no way we can get things to transition right and get things to draw properly. So what I've done was my process of making this was I first laid everything out. I made it look how I wanted, and then I went back and I broke it down into layers, and I broke it down into lots of layers. Now, you'll see in my layers panel over here, I have these folders called passes, and I'll just open one of these passes, and let's open pass 1. And in this pass 1, I have a diffuse set of layers and an alpha set of layers, and it's pretty interesting how I built it, but I just built piece by piece, and then I broke it down into layers, and be sure to have a diffuse and an alpha, because otherwise if you don't have an alpha, your textures are going to look really opaque and not cool. So then after I broke it down in these individual layers, I then grouped them by diffuse and alpha, and then I grouped them in by pass. Now, this pass concept is pretty important to understand because in Unreal Script, we're going to have to draw everything in a set order because we can only execute one code at a time. We can't execute a bunch of codes at the same time. And even if we could, we still need a way to dictate what layers are on top of other layers. In Photoshop, we visually can tell just because pass 5 is on top of pass 4. But on Unreal Script, or in any programming language, it depends on your implementation. And for Unreal Script, the way we're going to set it up is just going to be basically the lower stuff that needs to be drawn first will simply be drawn first in the code, and the next statement will be passed to, and so on. So that's how we're going to accomplish that. Now, we have to break it down into passes, not only for that, but just because it's also easier to manipulate and to lay out and things like that. If we break it into passes, knowing what we have to place where on the texture sheet becomes really, really simple. Now, I'm zooming in at 200% right now, but if you look at my image size, it's 512 by 180. It's very important, or for the sake of making things easier, if one of your dimensions is on a power by 2, if not, then you have to always keep in mind the next up power of 2 from your current size. So by keeping this at 512, I can go ahead and make a new texture. It's a power of 2, and it will import just fine, because remember, you can't import textures or texture sheets that don't have powers by 2. So because it's 512, we go back to our base A VSC here. If we go pull up the image size, I originally made it at 1024 by 512. Now, because I have 5 passes, and the height of each pass or each image is 180, so 5 times 180, let's just call that 5 times 200. That's 1,000 pixels, right? And that's less than 1024. And with our width being 512, if we divvy this up right, we can split this in half. I'm going to go ahead and clear. Actually, I'm going to just clear all these guys. We can now split our texture in half. Now we have these rooms that are bright. but we're going to need 1,000 pixels down. So I'm going to go ahead and reset or change our canvas size to a height of, I guess, 200% or 1024 pixels. So our texture is now a square, but with 5 passes at 512, we can fit our HUD little indicator status thing, all 5 passes on the same spreadsheet without creating a new texture. Now, I wouldn't go any bigger than 1024 for a texture sheet for a HUD. So if we needed more room than this, and we were out of room on the side for other sprites, you would then go ahead and make a second HUD texture, and you would import that, and you would make a second variable for HUD texture. You would basically do all that. It's really simple, but I do not recommend pushing past 1024 for UI stuff, because then your UI starts to eat up a lot of texture room, and that's not fun. So I'm going to go ahead and, I want to save all my documents. So go ahead and close these 2 untitled documents I have going on. Alright, so let me just show you what I mean by these passes. I know I've been talking a lot about passes and their sizes and whatnot. Well, let's actually look at them now. Now, this is pass 1, and this is the bottomest layer. And notice how nothing really overlaps, really. Everything's kind of separate, and there's no point in making multiple passes for things that are not going to overlap, because we can just put everything on one layer and draw it all at once. So you'll see the effect here when we start moving up in the passes. Now pass 2. Pass 2 is just a health bar. Even while the health bar does not overlap the primary or the secondary charge bars, we have to control how much of this bar is drawn. And if we control how much of this bar is drawn with other stuff on the same layer, we will then in turn start moving other layers and start scaling those too. And we don't want that. So anytime there's any type of dynamic type of drawing that has to be done on a particular layer, you're going to go ahead and want to split that into one pass. That way it's just easier to work with and easier to do. So with that there, pass 3, that's just the primary charge bar. Pass 4, that's our secondary charge bar. And pass 5 are the things, that's just our foreground, everything that goes on top of everything else. While these aren't really all that dynamic, they do belong on top of the other passes, and therefore we have to make a pass of just them on top of everything else. So with these passes, once you break them down into passes, you can then basically copy these passes onto your texture sheet, and it'll be a lot easier to implement, because then we can just go in our texture sheet. In the first pass, draw the first cell. In the second pass, draw the second part of the spreadsheet, and so on. And eventually we'll have our 5 passes, and we can just go draw right down the spreadsheet. And the ones that are dynamic, we'll scale in the code and do our magic there. But it just makes it so that we have one texture, using the same texture we're using for other stuff. And the coordinates are really easy, because our x coordinates at 512. Our first one is at y equals 0. And then if we split this off into 180 cells, the same size as our HUD thing, or whatever your HUD might be, pass 2 would be 0 plus 180 times 1. And that's a little weird, but that'll make sense later. And our third pass would be 0 plus, 0 being our starting, of course, whatever your start would be, 0 plus 180 times 2. And that'll be your pass 3 coordinates. We'll go over all that later, but it's an easy way to quickly calculate our drawing coordinates without storing 2 or more variables for each pass. We can store one variable for the first pass, one variable for the size of each HUD sprite cell. I'm sorry, losing my words here, but yeah, and we can, so with 2 variables we can draw all these passes, and because they're all lined up perfectly, we don't need to store, oh, this pass is over here and that pass is over there. Now if you wanted to save texture space and compress everything, you could. You would need to do some more of that, oh, this part's over there, this part over there. But just to make things easier in the code, make things easier for all the artists, just easier to do it out this way. So with these passes here, I'm going to go over on how to move how I'm moving these passes into our texture sheet. That way you kind of get the idea, and that way we're kind of on the same page. So because each pass is 512 pixels, that makes it easier for us to split down the middle, like I said earlier. And our height is 180 pixels. So the first thing we have to do, make things really easy in Photoshop, is move over here, switch our ruler to pixels by right clicking on the ruler, clicking pixels. And I'm just going to go down to 180. Boom, 180. Now, then, obviously 180 times 2 is 360, but in case you don't want to think about our next thing, you always want to be right, you can open up a fancy calculator here, right? And so 180, that's pass 1, plus 180, which is second pass 2, or 360. So let's go ahead and drag a line up, 360. Boom. And once again, I'm using the info box, which is a window info, or F8, in order to figure out where my mouse is when I drop these guys in, so I know exactly what pixel we're at. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to add 180 again, just to be sure. And that's 540. And go down worse. Oh, I missed it by 1 pixel. Damn it. I want to clear this by dragging this to the top ruler. Drag it down again, 540, right? Boom, 540. Now, of course, the next one's going to be 720, but just to make sure, right? It's always good to double check, even though it's the obvious, because sometimes the obvious can go wrong. So now you have 720. And we don't need to mark off the last one, just because the last one's going to snap up in this corner here. But if you'd like to, we can do it anyway. That's 900, obviously. If you played any type of skateboarding game, of course you'll have all those 180 multipliers memorized. Or if you didn't do anything with the radians and you need a circle that comes from the degrees. Anyways, now with all these guys, I'm just going to save this just so these guys will stay in place. And I'm going to go ahead and go to pass 1. And I'm going to select my diffuse, or only show my diffuse layer, or my diffuse folder. I'm going to Control A, and I'm going to copy merged. Now, when you paste something that you've been copy merged like this, you're going to get the black background behind of it. If you use a black background, that's okay. We don't have to worry about that because our alpha channels are going to take care of that. So there's our diffuse, and I'm going to go ahead and switch from diffuse on this pass to alpha, and some of my alphas are not being shown. There we go. So I want Control A, once again, copy merged, or Shift Control C, go back here. I want to paste straight over this. And it's going to snap right in there so it's perfectly lined up. And now I'm going to hide pass 1, go to pass 2, make sure all my diffuse is there, Control A, Shift Copy C, or Shift Control C, paste. But this time I want to move it into the second, and it's going to snap right in position. Then I'm going to go into my alpha bar, or my uncheck diffuse, for my alpha, Control A, Control Shift Select, or Control Shift C, copy merge, Control V on this document, move this up here, boom, it's still snapping right into place. And I'm going to go ahead and do that for the next 3 passes, but I'm going to pause my video, that way we don't have to keep watching me do that over and over, just to keep this tutorial shorter. Alright, so I've already finished copying all my 5 passes. Now, if you have more than 5 passes, you're going to have to build your own logic and thinking about how to transfer subcoordinates and stuff. But once you get to the Unreal script coding side of things, you'll see that implementing this is going to be so easy. But it's just the art is really a pain to set up. So now we have all these passes copied into all these cells. Now we have to go back and we have to make sure that we put our alphas in the alpha and put our diffuse in the diffuse. And the reason I just copied all the alpha right into it is just so I know I have all the alphas set. So I'm going to go ahead and basically I'm going to hide every other layer that I copy pasted in here. And that should be 5 layers that I'm now showing. And clicking the little thumbnails, go ahead and control click all these, and we should get the full, control shift. Control click the thumbnail for the first image, and control shift click the thumbnail for all the rest of the layer alphas that we're going to be using. And you should get a selection box that's that goes around your entire all 5 passes. And with this, you go ahead and basically cut or copy merged again. Actually, go to your channels tab, and here's our alpha map. Let's click on alpha, and we see that our alpha for other objects are there. Just gonna go ahead and paste, and boom, that puts all our alphas for all 5 passes right into our alpha channel, and we don't have to worry about positioning things because we already snapped them all right into the proper position by the guides. So with that, you can now go ahead and delete all these alpha layers. Put these on here, boom. And now we can show all these layers. And these are our 5 passes for our HUD thing. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a folder. And just call this HUD status. Not really sure what I want to name this really, so I'm going to put that in there. That way it's just easier to hide. Now, the main flaw that you can see right away is that there's lots of unused texture. So while that is a downside, the upside is calculating which coordinates to use is going to be really, really easy if we keep them all the same size. And while the downside is more texture memory, the upside is less actual calculations in the Unreal Script side of things. So while we're going to be storing a tiny bit more on a video card, we're going to be doing less calculations in Unreal Script. And while Unreal Script is pretty fast, it's not the fastest language, so we want to try to cut that down as much as possible. And we're using a 1024, so the texture size or the texture memory we're going to be used by this texture alone isn't going to be all that much, because we're already utilizing our HUD. Some of these icons here, in fact, this here might replace some of that, but we're already doing pretty good in texture management. So for the sake of making the coding easier and the implementation easier, and making the HUD sheets a lot easier for artists to work with, I'm going to go ahead and sacrifice that texture memory for that. Now, the reason why I bring this up is you're going to always have to decide when to sacrifice convenience for performance or performance for convenience, because sometimes you can simplify your code into, by simplify, I mean speed up your code and optimize it so that's 100 times faster, but the expense of nobody will know what the hell you're doing in that code. Or, same with this case, we can go ahead and increase our texture memory so that it's easier to work with for everybody at the expense of, once again, texture memory. And this trade-off isn't really that big of a deal. I think the convenience here is so much more helpful than it is to worry about texture memory. Now, maybe when we're done and our HUD texture is finalized, this HUD texture is nowhere near finalized. I'm going to have an artist redo all this for our project. Maybe then we can go back and pack everything to be tighter, and then go back and code in or hard code the values of our HUD, because if it's finalized, you can pretty much guarantee that you'll know the hard-coded coordinates, and you won't have to do any calculations for that either. So, once again, it's all about your pipeline, your convenience, things like that. So, with that done, we can go ahead and save our Photoshop, and then go ahead and re-import this into your Unreal package, wherever you're saving your previous HUD texture at. And I'm going to end this tutorial for now, because this tutorial is just about setting up the texture. And in the next tutorial, we'll start doing the Unreal script on how to implement this into our game. So I'll see you then, and hopefully we can get this cool but ugly HUD working, and you'll be able to use some of the logic we'll learn in the next tutorial for your own doings, and make some pretty cool looking HUDs. Alright, thank you.